than 100 firemen spent 3 hours containing the blaze. At one time it burned out of control.
A fire chief came to me and he said, "We shall know in 5 minutes." And I said, "No, what?" He said, "Whether we've saved the Minster or lost it." It was as critical as that.
No one ever thought that could possibly happen to York Minster, and yet it did.
The most horrific thought that I had was, what would York be like as a place with a gaunt ruin of a cathedral in its centre?
We get quite a large number of false alarms to York Minster. The officer in charge, I think, rather responded this morning under the impression that's what he'd got.
It always turns out to be a detector head that's gone off, or a bird that's set a detector off, or something like that. And so we didn't think any more of it.
Well, we're just proceeding towards the Minster as though it was a normal automatic fire alarm.
And there was what appeared to be mist, fog, very slightly. And I remember saying to my driver, "It looks as though it's going to be misty in the morning."
The so-called mist became thicker. We suddenly realised it was from the roof of the Minster. You don't expect something like that.
There was flames coming from a door opening on the roof close to the rose window. We thought that we'd better do a good job here, because the Minster being the Minster, somebody's going to be asking questions if we let it burn down.
20 years ago, Ron Hunter had just started a new job as one of the team of Minster policemen. On July the 9th, it was his first ever solo night shift.
The Minster makes some rather peculiar noises at night, particularly in the summer when everything's cooling down. And it took a little while to get used to those noises and where they came from. And we used to do a search approximately every hour around all of the Minster, but we'd never had a fire in the Minster, I think, since back end of 1800. So that was the last thing on your mind. You know, they didn't occur every day. I drew the short straw.
It seems the fire may have begun when lightning struck, and by 2:30 in the morning, the lead-covered roof was well alight, triggering the Minster's automatic alarm.
I had to dash back to the cabin, grabbed hold of the master keys and went over to the south transept door. As I opened it, there was the fire brigade.
We went inside, saw that the few red hot brands were already falling down, met by the Minster policeman.
Bearing in mind you had something like 20-25 keys, and I'd only been here a fortnight. It took a little while to sort the keys out, much to the annoyance of one of the fire brigade.
As the fire spread, Ron contacted the Minster's Superintendent of Works, Bob Littlewood.
That evening we'd been out and we were sort of stood in the back bedroom, my wife and I, looking at the lightning. And when the phone went, and it was Ron, and Ron said, you know, "Bob, I've got a fire."
Bob was quite surprised, in fact very surprised.
Disbelief really, that it really was a fire, and a serious fire, because, as I say, it was already bursting through the roof itself. And so having joined Ron here inside, went into the south transept itself, and within what seemed like a very, very short time, the flames were actually coming through the vaulted ceiling. And the fire brigade had arrived. We were then going up in roofs with them, showing them how to get to the fire and in various roof spaces. So we spent a lot of time running up and down turrets and getting access to the fire. I remember next morning, actually, I was so stiff I could hardly walk. But you do these things automatically.
Till I saw it at York Station, the flames were well over the top of the trees, and I was still nearly a mile away. Then you realise that it's really, really serious. And then it's all adrenaline, of course.
I had a navy blue blazer on at the time we'd been out that evening, and I found all burnt holes all over it, you know, and it's peculiar. You realise then how dangerous it was. having been up aloft and then later on back below, one of the jobs I did early on was to call out the clergy.
I saw a flaming balk of timber falling and hitting the banister of the steps down into the undercroft, and it shot fragments all over in my direction.
Priority was to get all the movable and valuable things out of this part of the Minster, because this is where movable things are. We could carry books and carpets and crosses and candlesticks and things out, which we did.
We all set to work, literally, carrying out everything we could possibly carry of value.
Moving that great carpet, which took about 10 of us. Huge weight, but we got it out and through that door.
And to see the Dean, and Mrs. Jasper in particular, the Dean's wife, carrying a huge piece of furniture. She was a strong lady. I mean, I said, Betty, put it down, you'll do yourself an injury. No, Ralph, I'm getting this out. It survived the fire of 1829, it's going to survive this fire. And fortunately, one of our close residents opened his house in Chapter House Street to allow all the goodies to be put into his house. I mean, his kitchen was really an Aladdin's cave by the end of the morning.
Ralph and I wet our handkerchiefs and tied them round because of the smoke, and came in to get some of the books on the choir stalls there, some of the old big ones, the ones given 100 years ago, and we came out again, and it was clear then that we mustn't come back in again. It really was, the smoke was getting too intense.
On the Evening Press, my paper, the photographers, quite rightly, didn't want to be mucked about in the middle of the night, and so they always said, never call me out in the middle of the night unless the Minster's on fire. This was the one occasion. I got the tip off at 3 o'clock in the morning and rang the fire brigade, and I said, I understand there's a fire at the Minster, how is it? And I remember the chap's words, it is well alight. And I thought, by gosh, you know, this must be something.
The south transept only had one access point on the southwest side, and of course that's where the fire actually occurred. We couldn't get into that space at all to fight the fire, so you know, until it actually burst through, there's very little the fire brigade could do about it.
It was an old building, a high building, very difficult to get to the roof, very difficult to deal with. We had to go up the outside of the Minster itself. The men were pulling the equipment, the ladders, the hose pipes, they were pulling up the outside of the Minster, which takes a little bit of time and energy. Once you're on the roof, very narrow walkways to walk along, lead-lined roof, close boarded under that, makes it very difficult to actually get into the roof to actually fight the fire.
It was quite frightening because the burning timbers were being carried by the wind and the heat of the fire, being carried up over and deposited on the nave roof. You could see these burning timbers landing on the nave roof, and of course there was a great danger that the fire would spread even further.
I think the worst bit was there was a period when we couldn't do anything at all apart from just watch the thing burn.
It progressively got worse, and then it was breaking through the roof. It was quite bright up in the air then, and by that time other appliances were turning up, more men turning up, lots of activity, very dark, and just the glow of the fire. Very strange.
The fire had spread into the lower aisle roofs and on the either side of the transept, and of course they join up with the nave, so it could quite easily have run round into the nave roof.
And there were 3 firemen literally beneath the great central tower, hosing straight up into the fire.
And I can remember standing, teams of firemen, all kitted out with breathing apparatus and the rest of it. The doors would open and all you would see was this thick, acrid smoke pouring out of the place. And I thought, by gum, they're going in there, that's bravery for you. And the teams went in and then the doors shut again. And I wondered all the time what was happening in there.
The old White Swan in Goodham Gate overlooks the Minster. Landlord Ray Clegg woke up in the early hours to a sight he'll never forget.
I just could not believe what I was seeing. I mean, I must have stood still for about 10 minutes just looking. in shock, really, and all I could see was the Minster burning. Until then, I thought, well, I better go and wake my wife up and bring her out and show her what's happening. So I went back in, and as I did, I grabbed the camera and came out, and she was in shock as well when she saw it. And I just managed to click away and take some photographs. I was looking at the rose window, and the glow through the rose window. I could see the firemen on the roof training the water jets onto the roof itself. In shock is it was the Minster, not just a building. It was the Minster burning. I mean, we'd only been in York for about a year and got to know the Minster quite well because it was a nice view from our windows, you can see from the photograph. And it was a real shock. We were both deeply shocked by it.
We could hear from time to time the beams crashing down onto the ground as the fire took its toll.
I was inside the south transept with one of the small internal hose pipes trying to put the burning timbers out as they fell, and we suddenly got a call. There was one fireman and myself in there, and we got a call, get out, and we got out, and just shortly after that the whole roof came down like a pack of cards.
I was on a higher roof looking down, and it was quite spectacular watching the domino effect of the roof joists collapsing one after the other.
The noise was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. The ground shook.
And a huge flame leapt up higher than the central tower. I mean, that was the sight of the night. Terrible sight, really.
Well, I went with a bang and a crack, and I saw some firemen running back, and the whole lot just collapsed in one go with a load of shower of sparks.
When those final beams collapsed, although these steel bars were really heavy-duty bars, when the beams went down, they just twanged around like a toy, like a kid's toy, burning beams before they finally all fell out as well. So it's incredible to watch that, but it's got to be said, there was a big sense of relief that the thing was dropped and down on the floor.
And they actually made it fall. I mean, some of the firemen, I understand, actually hacked at the things to get the roof to fall, because they realised once it was down on the floor, the rest of the building was saved.
Because if you look up to the central tower, you'll see that all the stonework was very badly burned to a depth of 7 feet, and flames were being sucked into the central tower. This we found after the event. And the paintwork of the central tower was being compromised, was being blistered. Had that central tower burst into flames, we'd have lost the entire cathedral.
When it was safe to re-enter the building, the extent of the damage became clear.
The smoke was going out straight away, you see. The air was clearing straight away. And there were the firemen jetting their water into the fallen timbers, which were to a height of 6 to 10 feet.
All the south transept there was just timber, roof slates, rubble of all sorts.
And I've never seen such a mess in my life. The water from all the hoses was over my shoes, which got soaked. Fire hoses all over the place. But the walls, the ceiling, the windows, everything blackened. You can't imagine really what a tragedy that was. No flames, no fire, but the whole place absolutely ruined.
Of course, with no roof on, so the light was flooding through into the transept. And the first thing I saw, actually looking up, was a stone cross above the gable. And I took great heart, in seeing that cross, because I am a committed churchman. And I took great heart and consolation seeing it there because it had survived the fire.
In the south transept there was this carved figure of the Virgin Mary with the dead body of Christ. And Virgin Mary was sticking up, sort of with her hands like this, mourning over her dead son. Her dead son was invisible underneath this pile of black smoking timbers, except for one hand which was sticking up out of the timber like this. It really was the most amazing sight. because the Virgin Mary seemed to be mourning, as we all were, over the mess on the floor.
In the cold light of day, after all the blocks of timber had fallen, it was unbelievable to suddenly look and see where molten lead had congealed on the magnesium limestone, even affecting the crucifix. And that long streak is a sign of where one of the blocks of timber, charred, scraped its way down here. And then, of course, this prie-dieu was burned by molten lead, and the kneeler was completely destroyed, and the good ladies have replaced it with the phoenix arising out of the fire. We've left it like this because, well, it's natural, and it's a reminder of the calamity that has been overcome.
The deposit of soot and grime on the ledges, mouldings was terrific, you know, all over the cathedral. And that was one of the major jobs that we had to do, clean the cathedral from top to bottom.
This would appear to be the seat of the fire. There used to be a little vestibule here. It was the only way into the roof. Actually, coming up here was very peculiar because Bob asked me to come up and try and get some smoke out of the central tower. Because on the gallery up there are some of the windows that open, and that was smoke logged. It was all perfectly safe and everything, but all the roof had collapsed in the vault beneath, so this was just a huge void, and it was very odd walking along this parapet with nothing to one side of you. It's just the fact you're looking into what should be a roof and something you're used to, you know, rather than just being a huge void with all these small people crawling around down below, spraying water about. It's very odd.
With the buildings saved, attention focused on the south transept's historic rose window.
One could see the cracking of the glass. One could not tell from the outside really what the extent of that cracking was. You would just see that it was cracked, and of course it was covered with soot also. So that spoiled sort of the viewing of the glass. But what did happen, the solder, which joins the separate pieces of lead together, holds them together, that in hundreds of places had melted. The leadwork got pretty close to being totally destroyed. But when I examined the glass as far as I could from close to, I was quite sure in my own mind, even then, what, 3/4 an hour after the roof had fallen, that the window was repairable. And I think probably those were the brightest and most cheerful words said in the early hours of the 9th of July, 1984.
As the clearing up began, the immediate concern was how to get the Minster back in business.
I was chairing the first meeting, you won't believe this, at 2 o'clock that same day with all the essential people. I mean, I was the titular chairman opening the meeting. Gentlemen, how are we going to put it back?
Within 3 days we had the cathedral open again, ready for services. It brought out the very best in the community.
Hundreds of marvellous York ladies came in with their buckets and mops and dusters and everything on the days following the fire to clean the Minster.
One lovely old couple came up to me. They pressed a £5 note in my hand. They were crying too. They were York old age pensioners who said, "Oh, you must put our Minster back."
2 young men from Barnsley, as broad Yorkshire as you can have them, came in that very day of the fire and offered to clean the sanctuary carpet in the nave. But the spirit was wonderful. People were so generous and kind.
I thought it was a tragedy. I did really. After all the money that's been spent on it recently, it is just a tragedy.
I feel all I could do was just go on my knees and say, "Lord, save the Minster, and Lord, save the glass and the men." And he did.
I was born in York, and I could have broke down and cried, actually. It's a real tragedy to York, is this?
Well, as a local paper, of course, we had to go to town the following day, and I can remember that the main picture on the front page was of the camera looking up and seeing the sky through the south transept roof. And it reminded me of a wartime scene of a bombed building, you know. It looked that graphic. And we got loads and loads of letters, people writing in and saying, you know, what a sad thing it was. But there was a sort of wartime spirit about it all, that, you know, a little bit of the Dunkirk spirit. It's happened, but we're going to press on and everything will be put right. And actually it's a miracle that everything has been put right.
When you think of the choir roof having gone in 1829, when you think of the nave roof having gone in 1840, this roof in 1984, of course the central tower went in 1829 as well. The people of those days, without insurance backing, put it back. We couldn't have done any less than put it back. The Minster is Yorkshire, and something solid and strong and worthwhile, and it speaks to people.
I think it meant a lot to people all over the world because they remembered York Minster. And people do remember York Minster, they only have to come here once.
I won't forget any of it. Every little detail seems to be imprinted on my mind, and I think most of the people who are involved will feel the same.
From the moment when I rang the fire brigade and asked what the situation was, not knowing, and they said it's well alight, and I thought, the Minster well alight? You just can't believe it.
It seems like only yesterday to me, not 20 years ago.
And to see that house of God with debris piled 8-9 feet high in places, in the state it was that morning, was really heartbreaking. And I can say to you, unreservedly, it was one of the saddest days ever in my life.
I think we put our part into it to save the building, yes, and I think we should be proud of it. I think very proud on that night.
It's very nice actually. I have a nice feeling that you actually contributed to saving the building. And it's nice when your grandkids go to school and they go on trips past the Minster and they're able to tell the school and the classes that their grandfather was at the Minster.